Hello, Leslie. Thanks for joining us here on Smarter Markets at IETA's North America Climate Summit 2023.
Thanks, David. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for the Abex team for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely, because I really wanted to hear what you at Terra Global are up to. And I'm really curious, there's so much conversation at the conference about the carbon markets. How do the carbon markets fit into what you're doing to advance climate action?
Well, since I founded Terra Global in 2006, so more than 17 years ago, we were founded to attract private sector capital to what's now called nature-based solutions. It has a whole bunch of other names along the way. And to be able to do that, you have to have a market for this carbon asset that's created by implementing projects on the ground that reduce deforestation, increase tree cover, and then improve community livelihoods. So carbon markets are essential to us delivering on our goal, our mission, and aligned with our values to really benefit communities.
Right, and as you said, you've been doing this for quite some time. A lot of people got involved in the carbon markets over just the past few years and had a few years of very tremendous growth. And then just this year, I would say, is more of a challenging year, more growing pains. So whether it's compliance markets, where trying to get Article 6 markets operationalized, or in the voluntary carbon markets, where some nature-based projects like the RED have come under assault in the media with questions raised about reputation. I'm curious, how has this year, and some of the challenges in the carbon markets affected you, or how you're thinking about your approach?
Well, as you said, we've been at this for a long time, and there have been haters along the way, off and on, for quite some time. I think this year or over the last year, where we've seen both articles in the press, as well as even some academics and NGOs continuing to throw stones at things that really have been tested, things like greenhouse gas quantification for nature-based projects, community benefit. It's kind of frustrating, to be honest. And I think the approach that we have is to put our head down and do our job, which is to deploy capital from our Terra Nature-Based Solutions carbon pool into good projects on the ground to produce high-quality multiple benefit credits and continue to invest in improving your effectiveness in implementing on the ground, the accuracy and use of technology and the greenhouse gas accounting. So we're just going to keep doing our job and let the haters be damned.
All right. Focus on the projects, focus on the work.
Yep.
And, one thing I was interested in is, we're getting towards the end of the second day of the conference, and there's always interesting things on the stage, but often there's lots of interesting conversations in hallways and side rooms. I'm curious, were there any ideas that you wanted to bring to share with market participants this week, or any ideas you've heard that you're like, oh, that's a good one, I'm going to take that one away with me?
I'm really happy you asked me that, because we, in looking at the criticism, oftentimes not very justified criticism, but looking at it as someone who both develops and invests in projects, we're never going to go at the Guardian directly. We're never going to be able to spend the time to try to demonstrate how some of those academic studies weren't done in an appropriate way. But one of the things that's sort of forming for us is this whole concept of just transition through nature-based solutions. And when you think about just transition, started in the US, and it meant that if you're moving to a green economy, you cannot leave people behind, you cannot disadvantage people that are lower income, different socioeconomic classes. But when we think about just transition for nature-based solutions, and we focus entirely in developing countries, right? So if you think about developing countries, first, almost all developing countries have between 60 and I'd say 90% of their NDC coming from forestry and agriculture. So the only way they're going to meet their NDCs is through forestry and agriculture. So that's one thing. And then when you read into their NDCs, of that, generally the majority of it, sometimes as much as 80%, is what's called conditional, meaning they're going to promise to do this the only way that they're going to be able to have a meaningful impact on global climate. But they're not going to do it unless they have funds. So when you think about a just transition, it's our imperative, the capital markets, investors, asset owners, is to deploy capital here and figure out the best way to do it to both create the climate impact and the rural development impact that we can. And there's people that have been talking about just transition for nature-based solutions for some time, but it's at a fairly theoretical level. So ILO and IUCN, they have some papers, and what we're really trying to do is take that need, that requirement, and ensure when we put money to the ground that the design of the program, the inclusion of communities, the transparency, the governance, the gender equity, all of these things take that commitment to, just transition all the way down to the boots on the ground. So that's kind of something that we're test driving, and we're trying to figure out how to be a leader in promoting that. So I'm glad you asked, because we sort of trying it out. We're thinking about putting a thought piece together to take what is out there and make it more pragmatic and practical when you're talking about private sector climate finance.
Right, and it's so important because, I think what we saw this year is that if you're not having your own narrative out there, your own story of what you're doing, other people will fill the gap with a lot of criticism. And I think what's been seen over the years is that the best way to get money to a lot of these projects in developing countries is through the voluntary markets. I'm curious, have you seen like a pullback? Like, is it getting harder to get the capital to invest after the events of the past year?
I do think it's been a little bit harder to capital raise, but it's also been a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because people will say, well, not too much is trading, whether, in the voluntary market. And part of that is because the standards have gone through this enormous period of uncertainty, operational challenges because of the rapid growth. And so when people see not a lot trading, then they think risk, and then they think, well, I'm not sure I'm ready to deploy my capital. But I can tell you, like, we are seeing high quality credits trade for prices way higher than you type into Google and find out what a credit is. And part of the reason that there's not that much trading is because there's been such a backlog in the standards. I think we'll start to see that change, because things are, you probably saw Vera, the new era of Vera, which in the nature sector, they're one of the biggest standards out there. So we're going to hopefully see that start to free up some. And I really do think capital's coming in, because we're continuing to raise money for our fund, and we are seeing corporates as well as financial return investors with a climate mandate still interested and wanting to learn more. But it's new to a lot of them. Like, what is the risk of a structure that has a return from selling carbon in either voluntary or sort of even pre-compliance, if you could call it that, market?
Right, and I'm sure you've seen the ups and downs in the carbon markets over the years, and this might be the first, down that anyone's experienced over the past 2-3 years.
Yeah, you're right. It's so funny, because when I founded Terra in 2006, knowing that carbon credit, the carbon asset was the thing that would drive private sector, I thought, it's going to be 2 to 4 years until there's adequate demand to attract private sector capital. Well, 15 years later, it finally happened, and it happened pretty big, and it's been like that. And then in the last 6 months or so, we've definitely seen some drop off. But I'm convinced that if we continue to do the job that we need to do it well, do it fairly, transparently, and continue to invest in both technology as well as techniques, that this market will be booming.
Yeah, and we don't want to wait another 15 years, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
And so I wanted to ask you, in terms of, if there was one thing you could pick of, like, if we can get this right, get this developed, that will really help us move quickly. I don't know whether it's standards, something in technology, something in tools, something in education and communication. Is there something that you would pick as the critical thing for us to develop next?
Yeah, I have a couple of not earth-shattering ideas. I think one thing is more around stabilizing something that without it, we cannot have a market. And that's really, again, going back to the standards and maybe having some choice of standards, but knowing what the standards are going to be, because we're making an investment 2 to 3 years before the first credit's issued. So if you've made an investment under a certain standard with projections of how many credits are going to be able to be used to repay that investment. And then all of a sudden standards change, it makes it really, really difficult. So not, like some, evolutionary or revolutionary thing, it would be more stability in the standards. And then in our side of things, where we do everything across the nature-based sector, but particularly in what's called avoided unplanned deforestation and degradation, where you have to use historic deforestation and degradation to predict the future so that you have a baseline to measure against. And so what we've done is we've done a lot of work in using new remote sensing images. And what's really important now, and this is a little bit nerdy and technical, is that the standards are requiring that the measurement of the deforestation and degradation rates happen at a jurisdiction, even if you're investing in a project that's within the jurisdiction, right? And so what's happening is that now you not only have to have good historical deforestation and degradation, now to be fair, have a just transition, you have to be able to predict where across that jurisdiction in the future deforestation degradation is going to happen. So if you have one project over here that has no roads, no rivers, nothing by it, and then you have this other project over here that's right, across rivers, they're not going to have the same baseline deforestation rate. So we have it's called spatial allocation nesting. For those of us in the sort of red space know this. And so we have some technology called Terra that we continue to invest in using good quality image processing, classifications, and then being able to predict using statistical models that are spatially fit for spatial variables like distance to road, forest density, and to be able to predict across the landscape so everybody gets the proper accounting. Because otherwise, you have a transfer of wealth, which when I say that to a project owner, they don't know what I mean. But you, coming from finance background, you know what I mean, a transfer of wealth. And that's something that technology has to become more, not just us using it, but more applied efficiently and effectively across the sector.
And it's great to hear you get into some of the nerdier subjects, because I think often when you read things in the media, it makes it sound as if a lot of this work is like guesswork, as opposed to the level of technical rigor that goes into it and thoughtfulness.
Yeah, and we've built these tools and technology over 17 years, and we continue to invest in them. And one of the things, again, for avoided unplanned deforestation degradation, it's great to see that we have more images, higher resolution, higher temporal frequency, so that we can get a better sense of a better quantification of the deforestation and degradation. Because in a lot of places, degradation can account for a large portion of the emissions coming from forests.
Well, I'm glad you're focused on the work. Thanks for taking some time away from it to speak with us.
Thank you so much, David. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.